California has a way of making headlines that sound like satire. The state has poured tens of billions of dollars into solving homelessness, yet if you drive down Venice Boulevard or skid past an underpass in San Francisco, you'll see more tents than a summer music festival. It's the paradox of a place that calls itself the world's fifth largest economy, yet can't figure out how to keep families from living in their cars. Imagine this. Every morning, a mom in Los Angeles buckles her kids into the back seat, prays the traffic won't be too bad, and rolls down the same street lined with makeshift shelters. New tents pop up like weeds after the rain. Billboards promise luxury condos starting at $2 million, while a few feet below, someone is cooking breakfast on a camp stove. Welcome to the split-screen reality of California. The state has more unsheltered homeless people than anywhere else in America, almost half the national total. Politicians brag about historic funding, ribbon cuttings, and Housing First programs, but for everyday Californians, the results look like a cruel joke. Billions have been spent, but the sidewalks keep filling. And that leaves us with one uncomfortable question. Is this a failure of leadership? Or is homelessness in California a beast no amount of money can tame? Why are we digging into this story? Because California isn't just dealing with homelessness, it's redefining it on a scale the rest of America can't ignore. Other states may have shelters, but here, the shelter is often a tent pitched on the sidewalk you walk past on the way to grab coffee. That's the everyday stage where this crisis plays out. We're not looking at this through the lens of lofty policy briefings or dry budget hearings. We're asking the questions ordinary Californians mutter in traffic: where did all the money go? Why do the tents keep multiplying? And, most painfully, what does this mean for the families one paycheck away from joining them? Over the next 9 reasons, we'll break down the paradox why billions vanish into programs while the streets remain crowded with human suffering. Expect some shocking truths, some uncomfortable laughs, and a countdown that exposes not just California's failures, but the cracks in the American dream itself. One small shock, one big fall. It doesn't always take a dramatic twist of fate to end up on the street. In California, sometimes all it takes is a flat tire, a sudden hospital bill, or losing a single shift at work. When rent already eats up most of your paycheck, a small setback can snowball into eviction. Think of a family renting a modest 2-bedroom in Los Angeles. The dad works construction, the mom juggles part-time gigs, and they scrape together $2,800 every month just to keep a roof overhead. Then the car breaks down $1,500 to fix. Rent is late, fees pile up. Within a few weeks, that family's living situation shifts from an apartment to the back seat of the very car they couldn't afford to repair. This is the reality hidden behind the tents. It's not always about drugs or crime, but about the razor-thin margin between making it and losing it all. In California, that margin is thinner than anywhere else. And if you think this is rare, wait until you hear what's really fueling the crisis. It's not outsiders flooding in. It's homegrown. It's not outsiders, it's your neighbors. A popular myth says California's streets are crowded because people flock here for the weather and generous benefits. The truth? Nearly 9 out of 10 people who fall into homelessness here were already living in California. Most never even leave their own county. Picture your neighbor, the cashier who bags your groceries, the Uber driver who just dropped you off, the retiree who's lived in the same apartment building for 20 years. These are the people most at risk. When the rent goes up $300 or a landlord decides to sell, there's no cushion. One eviction notice later, the neighborhood you thought you knew is still there, only now they're sleeping in a tent around the corner. This isn't migration, it's disintegration. The crisis is homegrown, and that makes it harder to ignore, because if it can happen to them, it can happen to almost anyone. But even when there are shelters available, another paradox lurks. The beds don't always get filled. Empty beds, full streets. Here's the paradox that really makes Californians shake their heads. While sidewalks fill with tents, thousands of shelter beds sit unused. Not because they don't exist, but because the system that's supposed to connect people to them is a maze. Imagine you finally decide to leave the sidewalk for a shelter. You show up, but they tell you there's no walk-ins. You call a hotline, but the bed you're assigned is across the city, miles from the only support network you've got. Or maybe you've got a dog, or a cart of belongings. Shelters often won't allow either. So you end up back under the overpass in the same spot as before. It's not just bureaucracy, it's a human disconnect. A mom shouldn't have to choose between a safe bed and keeping her child's pet. Yet in California, choices like that mean beds go empty while streets stay crowded. And when the shelters don't feel like real options, many ask, is there a path from temporary shelter to permanent housing, or is it just another revolving door? The revolving door of shelter life. For many, entering a shelter feels like a step towards stability. But in California, the exit door often swings right back to the street. Studies show only a fraction of people who pass through shelters actually move on to permanent housing. Most cycle in and out, like a revolving door that never leads to a real destination. Picture a young man who lost his job, landed in a shelter, and started planning a comeback. He lines up interviews, keeps his head down, but when his time's up at the shelter, there's nowhere affordable to transition into. He packs his bag, walks out the door, and sets up his tent just a few blocks away from where he started. That's the cruel math of California's housing crisis. Shelters provide a pause, not a solution. And the longer people stay caught in that loop, the harder it becomes to climb out. So if temporary beds aren't the answer, what about building long-term housing? California tried that too and discovered another bitter paradox, the price tag. Housing that costs a fortune. California promised permanent supportive housing, real apartments with services to help people rebuild their lives. On paper, it sounded like the breakthrough everyone was waiting for. In practice, the price tag turned it into a slow-motion disaster. In Los Angeles, projects funded under Proposition HHH were supposed to be a beacon of hope. Instead, many units ended up costing $500,000 or more each to build. That's the kind of money that could buy an entire home outright in other states. Construction delays dragged on for years, and by the time the doors finally opened, the crisis had only grown worse. It's like trying to put out a wildfire with a garden hose made of gold, expensive, shiny, and painfully ineffective. While a handful of lucky residents got keys to brand new units, thousands more set up tents outside. And here's the kicker, while California spends big on high-end housing solutions, it also spends big on tearing those tents down. The futile tent sweeps. Every few weeks, city crews show up with trash bags, bulldozers, and police escorts. They sweep the tents, clear the sidewalks, and declare victory for about a day. Then the same people, with nowhere else to go, set up camp again a block away. For residents, it looks like deja vu. One morning you walk past an encampment, the next morning it's gone, and by Friday it's back, sometimes bigger than before. The policy isn't solving homelessness, it's just playing musical chairs with human beings. And it's not just pointless, it's cruel. Imagine losing your blanket, your medicine, or your kid's only toy because sanitation crews tossed everything into a dumpster. For someone already at rock bottom, that isn't a reset, it's another trauma. Billions are spent trying to make homelessness invisible, but all that does is push people deeper into the shadows, and in those shadows, life becomes even more dangerous. Life on the edge of danger. For those living on California's streets, danger isn't just a possibility, it's part of daily life. People without shelter are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. In Los Angeles, a disproportionate share of homicide victims in recent years were unhoused, despite making up only a sliver of the population. Picture a woman forced to leave an abusive relationship. She ends up in a tent near downtown, thinking it's safer than staying with her abuser. But nights on the street are anything but safe. Stolen belongings, assaults, and constant fear. For many, the sidewalk is less a refuge and more a battlefield. It's a cruel irony. The public often frames the homeless as a threat, when in reality, they're the ones most under threat. And surviving in that environment makes it even harder to find work, healthcare, or stability. But danger isn't the only hidden cost. Behind the chaos lies another problem. California's struggle to manage billions without clear accountability. Billions without accountability. California doesn't have a shortage of money flowing into homelessness programs. It has a shortage of clarity on where that money actually lands. Billions are approved. Countless agencies are involved. But ask a simple question: what worked and what didn't? And suddenly, the answers get fuzzy. Think of it like ordering a $20,000 feast, only to open the delivery bag and find half a sandwich and a receipt that doesn't add up. Taxpayers see headlines about record funding, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and shiny press conferences. But when they walk out their door, the reality on the street looks worse than ever. Without real-time data, coordination, and accountability, billions risk evaporating into a swamp of good intentions and poor execution. It leaves Californians wondering if they're financing solutions or just financing bureaucracy. And at the heart of it all, one brutal truth looms. No matter how much money is spent, nothing changes if the state can't build enough affordable housing in the first place. Too few homes, too high the rent. Strip away all the politics, programs, and press releases, and the core problem is brutally simple. California just doesn't have enough affordable homes. The economy booms, jobs multiply, but the housing supply never catches up. When demand skyrockets and supply stays frozen, rents climb like wildfire. Picture a tech worker making six figures, bidding on the same one bedroom as a nurse or a teacher. Who do you think wins that war? The result is predictable. Middle and working class families get squeezed, and those already on the edge slip straight into homelessness. It's the paradox of prosperity. California grows richer, but that wealth drives up housing costs so fast that thousands are pushed out of the market. Until the state builds housing ordinary people can actually afford, every other fix is just a band-aid on a broken bone. And that brings us to the bigger picture, the deeper insight into why California's homeless crisis is less about tents and more about the cracks in the American dream itself. Here's the hard truth. California's homeless crisis isn't just about people sleeping in tents. It's about the collapse of the promise that hard work equals stability. In most of America, if you hold down a steady job, you expect to afford a modest place to live. In California, even a full-time worker can still end up homeless. That flips the entire script of the American dream. Take the story of a woman in San Francisco who works at a grocery store. She clocks in 40 hours a week, pays taxes, and serves her community. Yet her paycheck barely covers food and transportation, leaving nothing for rent. She spends her nights sleeping in her car, changing clothes in the restroom before every shift. She's not lazy, not addicted, not running from another state. She's simply priced out of the place she calls home. This is where California's paradox bites deepest. Prosperity at the top creates pressure at the bottom. Tech billionaires buy lofts with rooftop pools, while a few blocks away, families huddle in RVs. Politicians celebrate new budgets, but the everyday reality is neighbors disappearing into poverty's shadows. Homelessness here isn't an accident, it's the byproduct of an economy designed like a two-lane highway. One lane speeding forward with Teslas and IPOs, the other stuck with broken down cars and nowhere to merge. Until that system changes, billions will keep flowing and the tents will keep rising. So here we are, California, the land of sun, tech, and billion-dollar budgets. And yet the streets tell a very different story. Tents rising faster than condos, families priced out of neighborhoods they built, and billions that vanish into the black hole of programs. It's the ultimate paradox living in the world's fifth largest economy and still not being able to afford a roof. Maybe California is both a dream and a nightmare, a place where innovation changes the world, but everyday people struggle just to keep a blanket at night. The question is no longer just about budgets. It's about what kind of society we're willing to tolerate. So let me ask you, if you were in charge, would you keep pouring billions into the same cycle, or would you rip up the blueprint and start fresh? And here's the more personal question. Would you ever pay $3,000 a month for a shoebox apartment in San Francisco when, for the same money, you could own a home somewhere else? Drop your thoughts below, I want to hear them. And if this California paradox shocked you, stick around, because we've got more untold stories that will make you rethink what it really means to live in the Golden State.